All right. Well, welcome everyone to our COP for January. I can't believe it is already January 27th. I don't know if you feel this way, but January to me feels like the longest January in all of the Januaries. We're on like week 27, I feel like, of January of this year. It's been a long one, but I am glad to be celebrating this COP with all of you. By way of introductions, I am not your normal host. My name is Emily Jarvis, and I lead our events team here at GovLoop. And I'm filling in for the wonderful Leah, who is handling a sick kiddo at home. She's got a sick kid. So we're going to send them some healing vibes. And I know a lot of us are dealing with illness in some way, shape, or form in their organization. So I hope you all are feeling as well as you can be right now. So we'll get started here in about 2 minutes. I want to welcome everyone, of course, to this year's Community of Practice, new supervisors in government in 2025. We are talking about how to make this your year, how to goal set for success, and all of those good things. While everyone is getting logged in here, we do have an icebreaker, just like always. And for this one, we want to know, what are your favorite winter hobbies? It's been like 12 degrees in DC for a week, although today I think it's like 45. So we're coming out of the extreme cold. The South has been really cold. So tell us, what are you doing in this winter to keep yourself occupied? Um, Go ahead and throw that into the chat, of course. I will say myself, for the holidays, I got a bread maker. Now, was that a good decision? Perhaps not, because I do not like to read directions. And turns out baking requires you to, well, read directions. However, I have successfully now made one loaf, so I'm taking that to be a success. We've had like 10 miscues, but that's fine. That's fine. We're calling them learning opportunities. Staying Making soup, Nanette, that is a genius idea. Diamond painting, Hillary, I don't even know what that means, but I'm going to Google that as soon as I get out of here today because I'm fascinated. Megan's also diamond arting. So this definitely is a trend that I need to better understand. So thank you all for throwing in your winter hobbies. Oh, a sourdough? Oh my gosh. Here's the thing. I love a good sourdough. I do. I do. Jerome, I love a good sourdough. Here's my thoughts though on sourdough. It is necessary to match the sandwich. Like, I'm just not going to have like a slice of sourdough, but if it matches the sandwich, I am all for it. Well, welcome to those of you that are just joining. By way of introduction, my name is Emily Jarvis, and I lead the events team here at GovLoop. I want to thank you all for being part of our community of practice. And today we are talking all things goal setting and really setting ourselves up to be as successful as we can be in 2025. For our icebreaker today, we're asking you to share what your favorite winter hobby is. And while you all add in those, I like reading. Reading is a great choice. Under a blanket in front of a fireplace with a nice glass of wine. That is super specific, and yet I can get behind that. All three of those things: blankets, fireplaces, and wine. Love them all. So great choice there. But while you guys are all answering the icebreaker, I am going to go through a few housekeeping items. So, the housekeeping items introduce Leah Anderson, who is our normal host for these communities of practice, but she is out taking care of some sick little ones today. Her daughter's feeling a little under the weather, so I'm here in her place. I'll try to do a good enough job for her, but here's some housekeeping items for you all to think about. One, please utilize the chat feature today. I want to hear from you way more than I want to be the one asking the question. So put your questions in early and often because we really do want to hear what you have to say. You can also utilize that raise the hand feature if you want to come on camera and ask a question. Both options are totally up to your disposal. So, with that in mind, let me introduce you to our speaker. So, joining us today is
Yes,
Jerome Banks. Jerome is the Organization Design and Development Manager at the U.S. Department of Personnel Management. He also owns and operates his own organization called Banks and Banks Consulting Company. Jerome, thanks so much for being with us today.
I appreciate you having me, Emily.
Yeah. So, Jerome, why don't you get us started here talking a little bit about our topic 2025 goal setting? It's a big one. Why don't you lay the groundwork for us for a little bit?
Yeah, this is a very appropriate time, of course, to be talking about goal setting with a new year, and not very far along into the fiscal year, and so this is quite appropriate. But what I would want to say is I want to take a second to kind of acknowledge that there is or maybe some weight in the room over uncertainty or
Mhm.
even stress, and this is a very uncertain time for many of our public sector employees, especially our federal employees that are on the line. And so I wanted to take a moment to just say thank you. So thank you all, and congratulations on being new supervisors. And thank you for taking on the immense responsibility of being kind of the most critical influence on your employees' mental health and well-being in their lives. And so if you're not familiar, a recent 2023 UKG study found that managers in the organization affect the mental health of employees more so than their doctors and their therapists. And managers in the organization or in the agency were on par with employees' spouses. And I assume followed closely by family. So family and spouses in affecting mental health and well-being. And so thank you again for taking on that incredibly important responsibility for the agency and for your people. And so I think in that light, I'm going to frame goal setting for ourselves and for our teams as part of a much larger kind of human-centered leadership responsibility that we have toward our employees and our organizations. And so as we kind of go through the next 25 minutes or so, we'll talk more about this, but meaningful goal setting is part of taking what I like to call a human-centered leadership approach. And that includes building a psychological foundation of three specific things. We'll talk more about these three things. And one is competence. The second is autonomy. And the third is building relatedness. If you want to learn more about those three, you can Google self-determination theory, and it'll tell you a lot more about those three. But we're going to relate those three those foundational psychological variables to our goal setting and our drivers as we talk about performance. So competence is feeling like you're good at something and feeling like you're valued for your contributions. Autonomy is having influence over the decisions that affect your work. And then, of course, relatedness is a common connection that we have with those around us. And you'll see that those the three first letters of those words are CAR. And I like to think about it like the car model because I think of those three things as the engine that drives success. And so those three parts of our psychological foundation set the conditions for optimal goal setting and achievement. And to bring it full circle, in times of uncertainty like these, it's even more important to stay focused on those relationships that are building psychological foundation.
I really appreciate that kind of foundation and thought process there, Jerome. I really do. So, With that in mind, I have a bunch of questions that our audience can see here, but as a reminder, please add any notes or questions or anything like that into the chat, because we're here to kind of accommodate and answer your questions. So, Gerome, building on what you just said here and the car model, which I'm going to use forever, um, one of the things that I think is so interesting, especially for this group, is all of our supervisors are sandwiched in the middle, right? You're reporting your goals up to your supervisor, your manager, but you're also trying at the same time to get the goals for your direct reports kind of working here. So, how can you best help identify goals for yourself and for your team? What are some strategies you have in place?
Excited to answer that question. Before we get to that, I would like the audience to think about these couple of things as we go along. And you're welcome to put some or part or all of the answer or responses to these things in the chat as we go. But I'd like for the audience to think about a time when you were really motivated to accomplish a goal. And someone, it could be anyone, it could be yourself, it could be your boss, it could be a colleague or somebody at home that thwarted or hindered that motivation. What were
Mm,
some of the things that they did to crush your motivation?
yeah.
And that sounds pretty pejorative, but let's think about the inverse of well as well. So also think about a time when you were really motivated to accomplish something or a goal and somebody encouraged you. Now
Yeah.
think about some of the ways that and some of the things that people did to encourage you to achieve those goals. And sort of as we talk about that and as you think about it, feel free to throw those things in the chat and then also see if they align to what we'll be talking about today.
Yeah. Well, while folks are adding here, Jerome, I can just say for myself, I have experienced what I like to call the opportunity vacuum, which sounds weird, but someone that says you can do whatever you want, just carve out some time and energy to do it. And that is wonderful, and I appreciate that, but that gives you so little direction that, especially as a new supervisor, as a new kind of person in my career, I was left adrift. I was like, I don't know where I'm going with this. So it was too many opportunities or too much room to breathe, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, I really appreciate that and appreciating the amount of trust and autonomy that your leadership had in you to
Yeah.
provide, that level of ownership, but also kind of lacking a little bit of the relatedness
Mm,
that gives you direction, and to build on the competence that you would need to be able to exercise that autonomy. And so
yeah.
all three of those things are really important.
All right.
I oh, go
I
ahead,
was
Emily.
going to
Sorry.
say here in the chat, we've got procrastination leading to self sabotage, hindering motivation, lack of support or direction, having a partner or partners to keep in check, those types of
Mhm.
things.
Yeah, accountability is
Mhm.
certainly one of the things that we'll talk about a little bit more in depth, and what are some of the ways that we can keep ourselves and others accountable. So Emily, you talked a little bit about kind of leading from the middle,
Mhm.
and from my perspective, I like to take the view that all leadership starts with leading oneself and modeling a set of behaviors. And so it's imperative that leaders are able to set and establish their own goals and model those goals before establishing goals or collaborating on goals for others.
Hmm.
Uh,
Mhm.
Plus, in the organization, if your goals are tied to the agency's goals, then the agency's goals should be cascading through you to staff. And so I like to think about developing goals kind of in three different phases. And the first is taking an inventory or an understanding of your current environment. The second would be setting a vision. And then the third is determining the path that you need to achieve your goals. And it's not until you get to that third portion or that third phase that you actually begin to develop goals for yourself or for others.
Hmm. I love that. Um, All right. Babette added for hindering motivation, lack of appreciation for how far, how much, for how far or how much has already been accomplished. It's a tongue twister kind of Monday. So with that in mind, Jerome, what are some ways that we can go about documenting this? Because if it just stays in your brain, it's probably not going to go very far. So, what are some ways that we can document our goals and our plans and maybe share them effectively?
I just share with you that I have the objectively best way to document your goals,
Okay.
and that is to use whatever tools you have.
Okay.
So use the tools that you have at your disposal, no matter what those tools are, to document your goals. And to track progress. I realize that some people like Planner for various reasons. Microsoft Planner gives folks an opportunity to assign tasks or provide updates or track completion, to share progress with other people. I also acknowledge that organizations, some have IDP software
Mhm.
that they use, and it's usually aligned to the performance cycle and can be shared with employees and supervisors, for example. Uh, I use Excel, and so I am just either a table in Word or Excel is what I use to track my goals. I actually share it, and I invite important people. So I invite my boss, I invite colleagues, I invite team leads to view that those goals and to view how I track those goals. And so for me, for example, I've just got a matrix, and it's got my goals and objectives that belong to those goals, some
Mhm.
of the metrics by which I can measure progress, a time frame for which I think those goals should be completed. And then for me, mine are tied to ECQs, and they may be tied to a number of things. They could be tied to organizational goals. They could be tied to a specific value proposition or outcome. But all of those things are together there in a matrix in Excel, and it is as simple as I could possibly make it to stay abreast and to stay accountable to those. I would encourage people to use a notebook or a journal if that's what they have. I carry my notebook around with me everywhere, and that means that my goals are always accessible to me. And so whether you put a screenshot on the background of your monitors, or you keep it on a whiteboard in your office, or some derivation thereof, the important thing is that they stay accessible and top of mind.
Yeah. So, first of all, to our wonderful attendees here, just a reminder, you can always put a question in the Q&A portal, or excuse me, into the chat, or you can raise your hand, come on camera, do what you want to do. But I got plenty more questions because if any of our audience is even remotely like me, it's January, which means New Year's resolution time, which means by the 27th of January, I've already broken like three of my New Year's resolutions. We're working on it, but I am missing tennis tonight. To be fair, my husband is sick, so it's all about balance, but it is hard to hold yourself accountable to goals. It is hard to hold your team sometimes accountable for goals. What are some strategies we can put in place to make that accountability really happen?
So, Emily, I tangentially heard that maybe last week, maybe one day last week or the week before, is kind of like National Quitting Day or something, and it's the day that most people give up on their New Year's resolution goals, and I don't remember exactly what that day is, but either way, you're doing
I made
better
it a week
than many
further
others.
than National Quitting Day. Oh, January
January 10th.
10th.
There we go.
January
See?
10th. All right. Well, success.
So, as
Um,
far as accountability, can I go back
sure.
to the first tenet of leadership? I think is to lead oneself and to first be personally accountable for our goals, and that means making sure that our goals align with our intrinsic motivations. And I'll talk a little bit more about this. That car model, competence,
Mhm.
autonomy, and relatedness really is creating an environment that allows internal motivation and internal drivers to thrive. Three of the best ways to do that, and three of the best ways to tie our goals to things that matter to us, are to tie those goals to play, purpose, and potential, the three P's. And so play is doing things that we find enjoyable and fun. Purpose is believing in the value of the things that we do. And then potential is seeing a task or an objective as a stepping stone to future growth. And goals that are tied to those three things are immensely more effective than those that are tied to some other external drivers. And in fact, these three external drivers that I'm going to talk about very briefly have been shown to actually thwart progress or motivation toward goals. And so that's part of the reason why I asked up front for people to think about ways that people have either encouraged or hindered their excitement about accomplishing a goal. Those three things, and some of this might surprise you a little bit, but those three things that when we tie our goals to them actually hinder our motivation and our performance are emotional pressure. So fear, peer pressure, or the desire to please. So when someone says, just do it for me, right? That's emotional pressure. Economic pressure means, simply either to gain a reward or to avoid punishment. And we'll talk about the difference between gaining a reward and being recognized in a moment. And the third is inertia. And so just kind of mindlessly doing things without reason or because that's the way that we've always done it. When goals are tied to those three things, conversely, they tend to be harmful to performance and engagement and goal accomplishment. I think the other thing is to have a partner. So at work, that partner might be your boss or your colleagues, and you can use one-on-ones. I like to use one-on-ones with my staff to help keep each other accountable to our goals. And at home, in my case, it might be a spouse. My wife is tremendous for this. She's a great sounding board. I talk to her about all kinds of things, and she gives me honest feedback, probably more honest than I generally would like. But also mentors and coaches. So if you don't have a mentor or a coach, I would highly recommend, especially as a new supervisor, I'd highly recommend getting involved through clubs, associations, and professional organizations, and finding a mentor or using your organization's coaching program.
Yeah. All right. So I think what I hear you saying is a couple of things. The first being, of course, you need some self-motivation. You need to be able to kind of hold yourself accountable, but you also need a kind of partner in crime to help doing this. But it's only going to work if the goals that you're setting are ones that are going to be really beneficial for you going forward, whether they're fun, they're tied to the mission in some way that motivates you, you're passionate about it, all of those things. But sometimes in a work context, we're given, let's say, goals or opportunities that might not spark that kind of the vibe. You're being told we gotta get to X, Y, and Z. That might not really fulfill that cup, but is going to be really necessary for your career. So how do you align mission success or mission objectives to your goals, or are those different things? Are those different, and I'm trying to put everything in the same bucket?
I think they all belong in the bucket. I will say that the positive effects of looking at goals this way are especially pronounced for those goals that might require creativity or flexible thinking or deep learning. When it comes to tasks that are more mundane or maybe safety related or compliance related, that those are still true. It's just not as pronounced as for those that for which we have to use divergent thinking. When we have to converge, it's still true. And the reason why is because when we get on board with the agency's purpose, when we get on board with our organization's mission, and we feel connected to an agency's mission, it's really easy to make the connection.
Mm.
It's really easy for us when we have a broader scope of visibility throughout the agency to help to make a connection, especially with our teams that align, some of those, I don't know, more boring tasks with the outcome, with the outcome related to the organization's purpose. Does that
Yeah,
help?
no, that makes sense. That makes sense. All right. So we are rapidly running out of time here. I'm not really sure how this happens every single time. But Gerome, I've got a couple more questions for you. And then I obviously want to give you some time for some closing thoughts here. So we've tackled the me, myself, and I. Let's focus a little bit on our teams here. What are some ways that you can help your team think about goals, whether that's prioritization or really kind of discerning what their goals should be? How can you help them in this process?
Yeah, I think a couple of things and things that we've already touched on a bit. And one of those is making sure that we're tied to the agency's mission and purpose. And so understanding ourselves, understand the organization's purpose, and then understand the team's purpose and how the team's outcomes relate to the organization's mission. I think another thing that we can do is keep each other accountable by having continued touch points and engagements with each other. And so including one-on-ones with our team to help to prioritize goals, but also when we're a part of other, tangent efforts, having meetings with those groups to track progress on those efforts as well. So continuing to track that progress and hold each other accountable. And then the other thing I think is going back to modeling, making sure that we're modeling a good example of what it looks like to establish goals, to track goals, to prioritize goals, and to communicate that with those around us, with our staff, with our colleagues, and with our bosses, to make sure that everybody is apprised and that it becomes not just a series of tasks that we're accomplishing, but each of those small moments of interaction and engagement build trust, and that trust together as an aggregate it turns into a culture in the organization of trust and performance and engagement.
Yeah. All right. So two more questions for you. The first is, obviously, we have an administration change on the federal side happening right now for our state and local friends. Many of them are transitioning as well, new governors, new leadership here and there. My question for you is, obviously, administration to administration, the agency's priorities are always changing. So how do you shift your goals to be in line with kind of the new priorities of an organization? And organizations are always changing. So how do you kind of keep in line while keeping your own personal goals kind of on an upward trajectory? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, certainly. One of the ways, as we kind of mentioned previously, is looking for opportunities. And so, as we understand, the first stage was understanding the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as we understand ourselves and our team and our organization, and the organization fits within the context of federal priorities and administration. As we understand those things, as we set a vision to accomplish those things, out of that process comes opportunities. And so when we leverage those opportunities, we turn that into actionable goals. And the only way to do that is to stay flexible. And so goals are not static. They continue to change and we continue to shift priorities, but they're dynamic and they're based on a changing landscape. And so my recommendation is not to be inflexible in those goals,
Mm-hmm.
and not to be afraid of establishing goals because they can change, but to do it. Kind of like when you ask what the best way is to capture and track goals,
Mm-hmm.
do it. And it might not
Mm-hmm.
be perfect the first time, and it may not align perfectly the first time, but we continue to make small adjustments and small improvements over the course of time to keep us on the right trajectory.
I love that. All right. Final question for you then. What are kind of the differences? Let's say we can achieve better goal setting. What are the main differences between teams who are good at this and those who don't really do it or don't prioritize it? How can you tell the difference?
So if I could rearrange that question just a
Sure.
little, I would ask what the differences what are the differences between leaders of teams who are
Mm-hmm.
good at goal setting and those who aren't. And so those who are good at goal setting see it through the lens of motivation. In
Mm-hmm.
other words, how closely tied are our goals to the things that we enjoy, the things that we find purpose in, and that posture us for a more positive future. So, in other words, how closely are they tied to that play, purpose, and potential things that we talked about? Teams who excel in goal setting, they know exactly what they're working toward and why, because they're generated from their own internal motivation. They're generated from a sense of purpose and alignment with something bigger, with the organization, with their values. And then the goals are connected to the agency's missions and values, of course. The teams who aren't good at it might be driven by fear or pressure. They might set goals to gain rewards or punishment. Can I just talk for a second about gaining rewards?
Sure.
There is a difference between doing work to receive an award
Mm-hmm.
as a leader, or setting goals that are based on receiving an award, and setting a goal, and the outcome of the accomplishment of that goal is is recognition that builds
Mm-hmm.
connectivity with your team, builds connectivity with yourself and your team members. And so it's important to really make that distinction, because recognition is a significant motivator.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because it builds engagement between ourselves and each other. For the teams that don't do it well, you can kind of tell, because sometimes they lack motivation and direction. They might spend time on low priority tasks. They might suffer from low morale because the team members don't see how their work contributes to a greater or grander purpose, and
Mm-hmm.
they can experience higher conflict just because of unclear direction and purpose and
Mm.
potential in their work.
Well, you, Jerome, have certainly given us a lot to think about, and we really appreciate it. I'm going to give you a chance here to give us some closing thoughts in just a second. But before you do, I want to note that our next COP is coming up on February 24th. Hopefully, Leah is going to be back in business for that, where we'll be talking about active listening. And we really hope that you are able to join us for that one on the 24th and engage with us. As always, though, we do have the monthly newsletter, the LinkedIn group, and you can always reach out to us. You can use Leah's email, leah@govloop.com, if you need any more information. I know that Jerome just threw another chat, put a link in the chat. It really is a Monday of all Mondays, for more information. So, Jerome, with that, I'm going to give you a second to give us some closing thoughts, and then we'll close out today's session.
Yeah, I would just say that ultimately, effective goal setting leads to higher engagement, higher performance, and a shared sense of purpose. And that drives both individual and organizational growth. And so it's important to establish those three things that we talked about in the psychological foundation with your team, especially when it comes to times of of uncertainty or angst, and that becomes increasingly important as things, as when things are unclear.
Definitely. All right. Well, join me in saying thank you so much, Gerome, for sharing your expertise with us. A round of applause. And we will see the rest of you next month. But as always, we just like to end these sessions saying thank you so much for the work that you do. We really appreciate and value it. So thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us this afternoon. Have a great rest of your Monday, and we'll see you back here next month. Bye, everybody.
Thank you all.